should train myself a little differently, but
We're past trying that.
Screen so that we're only seeing. So, there's absolutely no requirement that you come with a presentation. Sometimes people do and sometimes
Right.
people don't, so.
yeah, I'm a farmer first and president second.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm president first and farmer second, but it all ends up working out in the end.
Your farm right on the Lamoille.
No, my farm is on the Seymour River,
Right, so,
which tributaries into Lamoille, right from Cambridge.
No,
I think just because his camera's on,
okay.
he's.
If we could ask the witnesses who are not testifying to turn off your cameras, that would be helpful. You're welcome to stay with us and listen. And we're going to get started with Joe. Thank you for joining us again this morning.
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Joe Tisbert. I am president of Vermont Farm Bureau. I am also owner and operator of an organic produce farm, Valley Dream Farm in Cambridge, Vermont. So thank you for having me. My goal today is to share what Farm Bureau has been working on. For the last, about 3 years ago, a bunch of our presidents got together and said to our staff in Washington that this is becoming a problem, repairing equipment. We want every farmer to have the right to repair their equipment, but we also want them to do it safely, and we also want to protect our industry. So those things taken into consideration, it's been, in January, we signed an MOU with John Deere, and I'm hoping that my staff was supposed to send out the MOUs to you guys so you'd not have them. And then just a month later, we signed an MOU with Case New Holland, Case IH and New Holland. So we have now about 60% of the equipment that's sold, is what I'm told, that is now under an MOU for fixing. So what these MOUs do is allow you to buy the equipment for diagnosing, allowing you to have all the codes, allowing you to have the repair manuals, allowing you to have all the parts manuals, allowing you access to these products. And so we are quite excited about that. It's been a long time coming, but the MOUs are a first step to us building what is a national program instead of each 5 or 6 different states having a program. The other thing is we want to make sure that we're protecting our farmers. Being able to buy a high-priced tool that will adjust exhaust or exhaust horsepower, and hurt a person's warranty is not what this bill wants to do. This bill wants to make sure that we have a clear path to, if a farmer wants to buy the equipment or the local dealer wants to, maybe helps 5 or 6 farms, he wants to buy the equipment. The farmers want to buy it for them. We want to make sure that the farmer can get fixed as quick as possible. By having these codes reset, I've had my own tractor, the exhaust detergent, the DEF, not be clean enough and had to have the codes reset. I was lucky, my dealer came out within an hour and a half and reset my codes, cleaned me out. I was under warranty, so there's a quality of products that need to be used in order to maintain the new equipment. So with the MOUs and the ability that we give farmers now to purchase a diagnostic tool, be able to reset codes, I think we're jumping the gun by passing the law. Our goal in Farm Bureau is to say, okay, we're working on this. We now have 3 of the biggest dealers on board. We are working with all the rest of the major manufacturers to come up with the same plan or similar. And we think we're jumping the gun here. And as far as agriculture goes, we have put out in 3 years, we've got one farmer say to us, I can't get my tractor repaired and we need a right to repair bill. I mean, you know, we're in contact with farmers every week. And we're asking for that. We're asking for feedback. We have never heard a farmer come out and actually want this bill. Now, I heard earlier that, you know, the wheelchairs in Colorado. Well, is this an agricultural repair bill? Or is this a fix everything all repair bill? Where do we want to go with this? I mean, so that's my concern, is if it's agriculture repair, it'd be great if we had the opportunity to unfold what we're doing nationally without a law in place that may put everybody in the position that they need to be. And, you know, when you say we've had 3 major manufacturers in less than 2 months sign on, that's a pretty good record for Farm Bureau to work on. Now, I hear a lot about, well, you know, it's a pinky swear, or, you know, let me tell you that with the staff that we have a staff of 75 in Washington, D.C. that works on this stuff to help Farm Bureau, to help all the state farm bureaus. We have 50 presidents. We have all the staffs of 50 states. And believe me, Vermont has a very small staff compared to a lot of the states. Working on this and holding these MOUs to the fire. Part of the MOUs is a twice a year meeting to establish what's going on in this bill. How is this working for you? How is it not? How is it working for our farmers? Getting feedback from our farmers on how it works for them. So we're feeling like if we jump into this, how is that going to affect what we're trying to do nationally, and just to have a bill in Vermont? And then how many other places is this bill trying to fix? Is this trying to fix agriculture? If it's trying to fix a whole bunch of other stuff, I don't have that knowledge, but I would hope that we could get an ag exemption, that we could keep working on this and make a national plan, so that, one, with a national plan, the dealers are more apt to have the equipment available, the diagnostic equipment available, become more readily available. It'll become cheaper. It'll be easier for you to use. Everything would be more readily available with a national plan. If we're going to try to do state by state and every state has something different, where is that going to put us in the long haul? I believe it's going to hurt us in the long haul. So, my number one goal is always my farmers. I want to make sure that the farmers have the right to do the things they want to do, that they need to do. And I'm going to tell you, if they're like me, I'm just as soon call my local mechanic or my John Deere dealer and have them come do what needs to be done, because I know that I don't have that shop that I can work in. But I know a lot of farms that have a big shop and they may be willing to buy the equipment and do this. So, 1, 2, we're meeting twice a year with John Deere and Case IH and New Holland to figure out where it's going. And this is really just a starting point. And I feel like we've done really great work making this happen. So we need to protect the farmers. We need to protect the industry that we use as farmers. How, you know, probably John Deere is not going to pull out, but what if they did? What if they said, oh, Vermont's too hard to deal with. We're going to get our equipment. We're going to go to New Hampshire or Massachusetts and they can come buy their equipment there. What is that going to do to our infrastructure? So part of being in a Farm Bureau position is not only as a grassroots organization, we're building policies that we're working on from the farmer up. The counties are bringing this forward. I don't just sit here and go, oh, it sounds like a good idea, I'm going to do this. This is farmers getting together and passing the policies that we work on here. None of the policies that we will ever represent come from my staff, myself, or anywhere but for the grassroots from the counties up. So we want to make sure that we're protecting everyone and making sure the industry works.
See if there's any questions. Representative Rice.
So I just want to get clear on something because you said that you're not hearing from farmers that they want right to repair,
Correct.
but that your grassroots organization and all of your policies come from your farmers.
Yes,
And you've been working very hard on these MOUs to get right to repair.
yes.
So can you just,
So it comes from our farmers up, but it may be our farmers from across the country, because when we have a national policy, we have over 300 delegates that vote for policy into our policy book, and we meet every January to do that. So when something comes from the grassroots across the country and gets passed into our national book, then that's one thing, that's another thing that we have to represent. So not only are we taking the Vermont farmers, but we're taking a national look at farmers.
so the Farm Bureau is hearing from farmers that they want right to repair.
That's the feeling that we needed a fix, and we went out and fixed it. And we're out there trying to fix it, and that's what the MOUs are doing.
I think some people are saying, you're saying they're fixing them. Others are saying they won't fix it. And so, but what we're talking about with both MOU and the legislation in Vermont and in other states is right to repair. That's what they're all trying to get at. They're trying to get at it from you're trying to get at it by negotiating with the manufacturers. The legislation is trying to get at it by making legislation. But the basic gist is that farmers are saying that they want right to repair, and that's why we're doing this.
So farmers are saying that, then I did say that we want the farmers to have the right to repair, but at risk of having a splintered policy, Vermont, Colorado, somewhere else, at the risk of having that, we think the best way is to see how these MOUs work out and come back and say, now we have the fix, and it's a national fix, and it's a voluntary fix. We're not forcing somebody to do something that they don't want to do. So, so we have an MOU with John Deere now. Passing the law isn't going to affect the John Deere relationship with the farmer. But what it may do is say, okay, we're getting harder to deal with. Maybe the right to repair is going in a different direction than what the MOUs are saying. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm saying we want to see how this plays out. So we're working on it, and that's why we feel like this bill is not necessary at this point. I'm not saying it won't ever be necessary. I'm saying at this point, we don't feel it's necessary. We feel we've made the strives to make a national policy that will help all farmers. That's what we're saying, and also protect their industries. Clear or no?
Yep.
Or am I giving you?
Or the three, so I think you mentioned MOUs with three different manufacturers. We've heard earlier about John Deere, and you mentioned the other two. Are they the same MOUs for all three manufacturers?
They're similar. There's some wording that's a little different that I was told means the same thing. Last Tuesday, we voted to accept Case IH and New Holland MOUs. So
I was going to ask, well, I was going to say that we know the bill. We've read the bill. We haven't seen, or at least I haven't seen the MOU. So I'm wondering.
we sent them to you, so you guys will have them.
Okay. When we read them, are there differences between and in what would be required of the manufacturer?
Very similar. I think from my reading of the bill, there's a lot of similarity. The diagnostic equipment, the parts, access to the manuals, the repair manuals and the parts manuals and the, ownership manuals that, ownership we usually get, but we don't usually get a parts manual or a repair manual. That's usually in with the dealer, but now you have access to all that. And even in the past, those books are not cheap anyway. I mean, even if you could get, when you got to repair something to help you parts manual wise, which you can usually get, they're a few $100 or back in the day, they were a few $100 to get, I have a Kubota that we're trying to work, that I needed to work on, but, so we feel like we're making a national effort. We're making a national policy. It's going to entice the major equipment dealers to actually follow through. And we also have this national, we have 6 million members in Farm Bureau. We have a national presence that says, you guys are agreeing to this and we're going to hold you to the fire. So, and if it doesn't work, we're going to adjust it. So I just feel like we're jumping the gun. I feel like the bill wants to repair more than farm equipment. Some Representative Sims said so in a meeting the other day, that she wanted to repair hot water heaters. I mean,
That's a different bill.
There are other bills.
Yeah.
well, we were at a farm meeting, so she was talking to us, so I just took it for granted that she was trying to do the same thing with this. So if that's not the case,
Yeah, no, this,
that's fine, but I would love to see this bill.
This is Brenda, the pharmacist. Can I put you on hold, please? I have
Sure.
two other people on hold.
Alan Schaefer, you're not muted.
I just muted him.
Okay. Good, yeah, this bill applies pretty specifically, I think, to agriculture equipment and forestry equipment. There's another bill that may have caused some confusion.
Okay.
I'll turn it over to Representative Templeman.
So I'm kind of considering under what motivation did John Deere and the other manufacturers produce these MOUs? Was it, and I'm kind of asking you to kind of guess here, because I imagine you're not actually from these industries, you're a farmer. But do you feel that perhaps the thought of impending laws coming forward was the motivation for John Deere to get in front of this and release an MOU in advance of a law coming as a preventative measure, saying, hey, look, this, we already have something in the works here. Don't vote for the law, just stick with us.
I won't put words in John Deere's.
Of course not.
I won't put words in John Deere's mouth, but for 3 years,
Yeah.
But 3 years ago, when some of the presidents came across, there was a bill in a couple of states and the Farm Bureau, state Farm Bureaus were struggling with them and said, doesn't really do a lot. The bills don't really do everything we needed to do. And they came to the American Farm Bureau board and said, how do we get this done? So I believe that was all initiated from Farm Bureau to the dealerships. Now we've been having, so we've got those three on board. We're not stopping here. We're trying to get every major dealership to do it. Now, in the case of some foreign piece of equipment that maybe if the dealer has it, they ought to have some kind of diagnostic equipment for it. I totally agree with that, but I think we're in a really good place, and I think if we can get this done in 2 months, I know they're trying to work with Kubota right now. And hopefully CAT is also coming around. So I think we can have all the major components together once they see how this is working for John Deere and for New Holland and Case IH.
So just to clarify, though, you feel that the MOUs were initiated because certain states put forward bills that address this issue, and this was the response of the industry.
It could, and been on the board for a few years, and we saw the need with splintered states around the country saying we need a law, and we sat down and said, okay, we see this coming as maybe a law, and how do we get one law that provides everything? With the cars, I mean, everybody's on the same page. I have an MV1. I don't know if any of you know what an MV1 is car. It has to have a specific diagnostic tool or it doesn't work. And there's Ford parts in it and this thing, it's made specifically for handicap. my point being that if we're all over the place and then all this, we have a bill and now that diagnostic equipment is 3 times the cost because we have a bill and nobody else has a bill. But by having a national bill, I think it's going to help in the long run, having the equipment standardized enough that you can get what you need in order to repair. And I quite honestly, not in my wheelhouse. So repairing, I take it to the neighbor.
Representative Supernaut has a question, then
Sure.
Representative Rice, and then we'll probably want to move to the next witness just to keep going. But go ahead.
Sure, I'll keep it brief. I appreciate the sentiment of wanting to hold them to the fire if they don't comply. And I would equally elaborate on perhaps the best way to hold them to the fire is something that is legally binding. And then I was wondering if you could elaborate on the warranty piece. You had mentioned that it could have the potential to affect the warranty.
Well, I just heard the speaker before me say that they could buy this $10,000 diagnostic equipment that could change the horsepower, change the emissions. You know, we're under strict emissions for newer equipment. And that kind of bothered me that said, okay, so you want this diagnostic equipment to upgrade a piece of equipment that you bought at a certain horsepower or a certain exhaust standard, and now you're able to do that. What does that do? I mean, if we want to go in and start, anybody can go in today and ruin a warranty because you wanted to do something like that. But that's not what this is trying to do. This is trying to say, follow the rules. Now you have the right to do this, even though you're under warranty, and codes can be changed and reset and without a major deal. And I believe that this does that, and that I for one, I'm not looking to see any warranties broken. If my tractor's under warranty, I don't want to do anything to ruin that warranty. It could cost me thousands of dollars in the end. So that was my point with that. I heard that said there and I was like, that's very concerning.
Right, and if I could possibly add some clarity for you or perhaps the Farm Bureau members who might be listening, that US manufacturers are prohibited by federal law from voiding a warranty if there are third-party repairs or independent repairs done. So since 70s. So that wouldn't be something that you would have to worry about at all on that.
Oh, I don't know about that. I hope not.
Federal law, yeah.
Federal law for it, but it's like, I mean, you know, I'm just saying that was said and that concerned me.
Just in the spirit of not wanting to spread misinformation about what could happen to folks.
Yeah, I agree with that. I thank you for that. That's it.
Representative Rice?
Yeah, I just wanted to draw the distinction. You were saying that you thought you said you used the word a national or a federal bill would be is what you're working on, and that's a better solution. I think we'd all agree that federal right to repair legislation would be a better way to go here, but it's not happening. We don't have control over that. So what we can do is right to repair legislation here, and there are reasons why we make laws about things rather than simply rely on agreements between industry and industry-related associations, right? Laws have legal power. MOUs don't.
I can't argue with that.
Yeah, so I just want you use the word bill.
I'm not. I want to be clear that we're not trying to put a national bill together.
Right.
We're trying to work with industry that can make this voluntary, so we don't need a national bill, that farmers have the right to do the things they need. If I'm in a combine in Nebraska and it's a Sunday afternoon and it's going to rain tomorrow and I need to get a whole bunch done, I want to make sure that guy gets repaired. You know, and I do think that my biggest points are we saw a need to have something. We're working with the manufacturers. The trouble is that if you're doing an agricultural bill, the industry around agriculture is very small, right? You have tractor dealers and you have grain dealers and you have so part of protecting the farmer is protecting industry. So we need to make sure that if these don't work, we'll be sitting here with you making a bill, helping to make a bill, wanting to make a bill. But we think that because of our membership, because of our oversight, we definitely have a good chance to get everybody on board and make this all a voluntary step to farmers to have the right to repair.
Joe, before we let you go, these MOUs are between the Farm Bureau and, I know the Farm Bureau is a membership organization.
Yes.
Are farmers or owners of equipment who don't belong to the Farm Bureau, are they covered by the MOU?
Everyone is covered by this.
Thank you.
When we fight for Farm Bureau policy, we try to represent every farmer. I'm organic, right? So we try to stand up for every farmer, and whether you're a member or not, if we protect our farmers, we're also protecting every farmer.
Representative Graham, and then we'll switch witnesses.
I just want to say that, if every single state was to pass this same law on the right to repair, it'd be fine. But if Vermont passes a bill that requires something different than Colorado passes, then your dealers are trying to, make it much harder to comply. With automobiles, the diagnostic equipment on the vehicle is the same thing, no matter what brand the car you buy. So if you could get a national agreement that everybody needs to be provided the same thing in every state, it's going to make a bigger difference than doing different bills across the nation.
Is this a question for the witness? I want to just
It's
get
for everybody listening, just a historical question, if that's okay.
Sure.
I just wondered if, we know the history, mostly Massachusetts, passed the law on automobiles, right to repair, and then it was repealed in this deal with the auto dealership. So I'm wondering if anybody listening knows later, was there a federal law that mandated universal OBD courts? I don't know that. We haven't heard.
I don't know. I don't know that
We
either.
can see if anybody else
Yeah, I wonder.
then later.
Because I can see that being the next step is
Yeah.
all the agricultural and forestry OEMs do
Yeah,
something universal so that you don't necessarily have to go to your dealer.
right.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I just want to put a plug in. We're having a field tour, I think on April 12th, the morning of April 12th. We're loading up a bus, and I know Senate Ag is willing to come, and we're inviting all of you to come with us. We're going to do a tour of 3 farms that are fairly close to here, and we're going to stop at one. And we're going to have some members there for a lunch, a short lunch, and then get you guys back here before 1:00 in the afternoon. We'd love to have you all attend and see some different types of agriculture that are close by that I think everybody would benefit from. One of the reasons we're doing this is that in the past, we would do a legislative Farm Bureau would meet with both committees here. It doesn't seem to be that's a capable thing around in the building anymore. And we still would like to do that with our members. And have you guys sit with our members and have a little tea, so to speak. And so we really would appreciate it if any of you decide would be interested. Amber's around the building all the time. And I'm sure she's working hard at trying to put this together to give a good diversity of farms that we can visit early April. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll be in touch.
One of the 3 farms.
So Alan Schaefer, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Morning.
Good morning.
If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and we've got about 90 minutes and I think 4 witnesses, so hopefully plenty of time. Would you like us to hold questions until you're done with whatever you'd like to say, or how would you like to handle that?
That'd be fine. I can handle questions as they come or at the end, however you prefer.
Okay, all right. Well, why don't you go ahead and get started, and I'll keep an eye on the room.
Okay, very nice. Well, thank you very much, members of the committee, Chairman Durfee and Vice Chair Surprenant. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. I'm speaking to you from Frederick, Maryland. Frederick is a very highly agricultural county in Maryland, and I'm the executive director of the Diesel Technology Forum. And we are a not-for-profit educational group that represents manufacturers of diesel engines and equipment, components, both petroleum and renewable biofuel producers. And you can see more on us at our website, that's dieselforum.org. And I'm here today to express our opposition to House Bill 81 and focus my comments really on the environmental and emissions impacts. And it's our view at the forum here that if right to repair legislation is enacted, it has the potential to make Vermont's air dirtier, not cleaner, and it will facilitate tampering with emissions controls. And that's a practice that's in clear violation of the Federal Clean Air Act. And let me just say at the outset something that might bring everyone together on this. Some of you might remember a few years ago, the Volkswagen emissions cheating scandal. And here, investigations revealed the use of a defeat device, which was software code programming that effectively turned off emissions controls during the normal operations of Volkswagen vehicles. And this allowed the vehicle to get better performance and better fuel economy. So the owners of those vehicles loved it, but it also increased the emissions well beyond their allowable limits. The same software then turned the emissions controls back on when it sensed that a state or federal inspector might be conducting an emissions evaluation test, which has a very precise algorithm, and the system could detect that. So it turned the controls back on to pass the test. When the test was over, the vehicle went back to better fuel economy and performance and higher emissions. And that incident cost Volkswagen well over $30 billion in fines and penalties that they're still paying out today. Right to repair legislation effectively raises the risk of the same activity and the same kind of result. And that's what has us so concerned about it. Just to add on a little bit of context, that diesel engines really power nearly all farm tractors and machines today because of its unique combination of efficiency, power, durability, and reliability. Over the last 2 decades, manufacturers of these engines and equipment have invested billions of dollars to reduce emissions to today's near zero levels. And that's because of federal rules and to meet federal clean air requirements. On the back of my written statement has a chart that shows the trajectory down towards zero for that. And everybody benefits from all these changes because we don't have new tractors don't emit a big puff of black smoke at the startup, and while they're running, they have virtually invisible emissions. That's these systems working to keep the air clean. This is done today by a complex set of controls and emissions componentry. I don't know how familiar you all are with these devices, but tractors that have been built since about the 2014 timeframe all utilize a series of different strategies to reduce emissions. These could include things like particulate filters and the selective catalytic reduction, or SCR systems, that the gentleman just before was talking about when he was referring to the diesel exhaust fluid quality and the sensor problem. And the SCR systems really are key to achieving these very low emissions today. And if you don't properly maintain these or keep them filled with diesel exhaust fluid, effectively all the efforts to reduce emissions from the vehicle then are at risk, and you might have higher emissions. And so it requires an active role by the owner to maintain the equipment properly and to make sure that the DEF is properly refilled and you're using high quality material. And we know that there are challenges with emissions control systems like any other machine or equipment that are used on a very heavy kind of basis. But these are the requirements of federal law for manufacturers to produce these engines that achieve near zero emissions. We have a big understanding really from the federal government, who completed a very significant survey on this, the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance at EPA in November of 2020, released a major report on the incidence of tampering with diesel engines and emissions controls. And based on the EPA's enforcement actions, they identified a substantial portion of subject vehicles had software modifications to the engine emissions control units. And this is a result of owners, independent repair shops, or other crafty folks chipping, replacing software, adding on some kind of device that mimics some kind of behavior and results in emissions controls being defeated effectively. And EPA's look at this really focused on pickup trucks, and they estimated that more than 500,000 pickup trucks nationwide have been tampered with. And you can see these devices for sale on the internet and how to implement these on your own vehicles today. And it's very concerning for an industry that's invested so much to make diesel near zero emissions. And by doing this tampering, we're seeing well over 570,000 tons of excess nitrogen oxide emissions and more than 5,000 tons of particulate matter to be emitted by these tampered trucks over the lifetime of their lifetime. And that's just the pickup trucks. Now, while the EPA report did not quantify the extent of tampering in off-road engines and equipment, it noted very specifically, and I'm quoting here, AED, the Automotive Enforcement Division of the EPA Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, AED has the reason to believe this conduct occurs within most or all categories of vehicles and engines, including commercial trucks, passenger vehicles, pickup trucks, motorcycles, forestry equipment, and agricultural equipment, close quote. So really what this report showed, that this is a real problem, and it's not just one that folks are chatting about in the break rooms. It is a serious issue, and manufacturers that receive vehicles and equipment and machines in to repair or for resale find evidence of chipping and tampering all the time. And it creates a real problem with emissions controls, and there are other issues about safety, et cetera, but I won't get into those. Manufacturers have a whole range of federal requirements that they have to achieve to sell these products. They cover things like durability regulations and testing, in-use testing for degradation factors, establishing tamper-resistant emissions control systems. And under all these regulations, manufacturers could be held liable for providing a defeat device, like Volkswagen, to the market in the form of a service tool that allows end users to circumvent certain engine and machine performance inhibitors related to emissions controls. And this is especially true for SCR-equipped systems. And it's kind of a well-known thing that you can buy this technology out there and trick your system into thinking that there's this fluid in the tank when it's not there. And so this is a major problem. And it's critical because the Air Resources Board and EPA have gone through a lengthy process of interpreting all these emissions regulations and providing guidance to industry. And they conclude that manufacturers, by doing that, really are providing the ability to defeat emissions control systems by providing access to these ability to change these systems.
Mr. Schaefer,
yes.
Sorry, we have a question here, Representative Supranant.
Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry to pause your flow, but I'm curious because nothing in the current legislation that is being proposed makes it legal to tamper in any way. And obviously in Vermont, we are very concerned with clean air and our emissions, but nothing would make that okay in this piece of legislation. And so I'm wondering how you balance that with your points.
Well, I just read you a report from EPA, a nationwide assessment of the incidence of tampering. And I'm not sure exactly what all the words on the legislative page might say, but what reality tells us is that this is a practice that happens. And this legislation will effectively facilitate that by opening the door further for folks to have the opportunity to tamper and to make changes to the emissions control system for whatever reason. And whether or not you believe that it's written in the paper and the legislation that will either prevent it from happening I don't see that in there. I think that the real world experience tells us otherwise. With what's printed on paper is one thing, but what happens in reality is something else. And we're just encouraging you not to take a step that makes the opportunity greater than it is.
I wouldn't say that it's my belief. I would say that it is written on the paper very concretely, and I would say that it's concerning if you haven't read the legislation and do not fully know what exactly it is or isn't doing, but none of it makes that legal. And I think that you should really consider that when you're espousing these to be as facts. So thank you.
Representative Templeman.
Hi. You're using VW as an example. I'm wondering, in the case of VW, were customers or mechanics held responsible for the tampering, or was it was the industry, right?
It was the manufacturer.
Right. So, all right. Thank you.
I think that no other hands are raised at the moment. Mr. Schaefer, I'll let you continue.
Okay. So, all right. Thank you very much for that question. So I think just our sense is that this is really not the way to go for making sure that the emissions control systems that achieve these near zero emissions today in the tractors that are being used in Vermont and every other place in America could be tampered with. And there's a whole host of other issues around this topic. But in the EPA mindset and the manufacturer, this is an area that is very sensitive in terms of how much investment and how much control that industry has. So if we create the opportunity for folks by guaranteeing that they have access to the kinds of tools and technology that could be used in these incidences, manufacturers could be held liable. I mean, we know EPA is out there enforcing this every day. You can go on their enforcement website and you can see the fines and penalties that they've assessed on independent repair shops and others that have installed these devices, and the penalties have been quite substantial. And these are, independent repair shops, diesel tuner kind of places that modify and boost performance on vehicles. So it's unfortunate. Part of my job is to see a technology that is so near zero emissions and clean today, someone choose to go the other way and take us back to a time when diesel had very high emissions and was a major problem for air quality. And we've invested so much and come so far. I'm not sure why we'd want to risk that today. So I would strongly urge the committee to vote in opposition to the Fair Repair Act. And thank you for the opportunity to talk with you this morning.
Stay with us for another minute or two. We'll see if there's other questions from committee members. I have a question. Just wondering, we heard testimony earlier today, and I'm sure you're aware of it too, about the Farm Bureau and the memorandums understanding that they have with John Deere and other manufacturers. Wondering if you're familiar with those and what your position is on those. It's our understanding that substantively what's required of manufacturers in those memos isn't all that different from what's in the legislation that we have before us.
Thank you for the question. I am not familiar with all the details in the MOUs between the manufacturers and their customers. I think generally speaking that this is obviously they want to take care of their customers and serve their customers, but they also need to be in compliance with federal law. And so that's why legislation like this is concerning. I think if they weren't caring, they wouldn't be doing that with MOUs and trying to find a place that they can continue to serve their customers and not be creating a situation where they could be held liable for defeat device installation or tampering with emissions control. So I think industry is doing the right thing, and I don't have any of the specifics on all the different OEM MOUs within the industry.
Okay, Representative Cole.
Would you
speak to what kind of incentives exist for consumers to tamper with those emissions controls and how strong those incentives are?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think there's the economic incentive, and there are a range of ones. I'll just give you some examples here. So let's say you have a tractor that has the selective catalytic reduction technology. The SCR system requires that the fluid be available in that system all the time for operating. That's called diesel exhaust fluid. It's aqueous urea, and it reacts with the exhaust stream to neutralize emissions of nitrogen oxides. So it's critical to achieving the tailpipe near zero emission standards. Today's diesel exhaust fluid costs about $30 to $45 for a two and a half gallon jug. And if you have like a standard row crop tractor, they have capacities of in the 4 to 6, 7 gallon range. So to fill that tank every time, there's an economic cost there. And, we're looking at maybe $250 or so. And this tank has to be replenished periodically based on the fuel consumption of the tractor. It's not filled at the same level of fuel consumption. So that 4 to 6 gallon tank of diesel exhaust fluid would likely last that tractor for several refills, full refills of its fuel tank before it need to be replenished. So there's the economic incentive to not fill that fluid. And if that's something you can figure out a way to bypass, then you're saving yourself, maybe several $1,000s during the total season of planting and harvesting and tending. So economics is one. I think the other one that has come up, obviously, in the vehicle side in Volkswagen, but also is completely relevant for tractors, is performance. And in the old days, let's say, before engines had electronic emissions controls, they were mechanically controlled. So with the basic knowledge and a screwdriver, you could pop the hood and adjust the fuel flow into the engine. So that would give you a boost in performance. You would get more power out of your tractor doing the work that it's doing, and that was fairly easy. But today, with the electronic emissions controls, a screwdriver is not going to cut it. You're going to need some specialized tools and software and connections to tap into that and try and make those adjustments for whatever reason. Some folks have said that, they like their tractor to go faster on the road because they feel like they're backing up traffic. So what's a little bit of a boost? 10, 15%, that's going to cost you in the fuel side, but if you like to go fast, maybe that's a cost that's not important to you. The danger in that is that entire tractor is designed from a safety perspective around certain engine power and performance requirements and outputs. So if you boost performance and fuel consumption and power by 10, 15, 20%, that's more stress on braking systems that are operating on the road. There's more stress on power takeoffs. So if you're hooking up a blower or some kind of device on the back of the tractor, if the clutch can't handle the higher torque demands from a boosted engine, maybe there's going to be a failure of a metal part and somebody gets hurt. So economics and convenience, power and performance are the real motivators behind folks that are trying to make some of these changes.
Representative Rice.
So you've explained to us that tampering, this tampering is already happening. It's happening in markets where we do effectively have the right to repair, like passenger automobiles. It's happening with agricultural equipment, equipment that we don't have the right to, consumers don't have the right to repair. And you've explained that there are clean air and emissions reductions laws in place that have enforcement mechanisms to discover that kind of behavior and to create to impose a fine, whether it's industry in the case of Volkswagen or a repair shop or a consumer doing the tampering. Can you explain exactly how this legislation changes that reality, that landscape?
Well, I think it makes it easier. right? It makes it easier to have access to the kind of tools, technology, software code access, et cetera, that can facilitate this. And not saying that everyone has that intent, but it's out there, and it's been an issue that's the agency EPA is, cast a pretty wide net on and has a very detailed report. So just because, if you think that this legislation, it's already happening, so what? The legislation is not going to make any difference one way or the other. I think I would disagree with that. If your intent is to maintain or improve environmental quality in Vermont, then this legislation goes against that.
Well, I think to be clear, I don't believe that you heard me say it's already happening. So what? I think you heard me say it's already happening, and we have laws in place to deal with that fact.
Yeah. So I apologize for misrepresenting your statement there, but I think, at the end of the day, it's just a question of, what do you want to facilitate? I mean, manufacturers are stepping forward to provide their customers with reasonable access and alternatives to repair. You've heard testimony on that already, and there's more to come. But from an environmental perspective and emissions perspective, do we want to take the step and the risk of opening the door further to this kind of activity? And, this is an issue where more new technology is coming, right? This is investing in new equipment requires, more exposure to electronic emissions controls, et cetera. So it's not like there's going to be a return to the old days, so to speak. And I think there's just a desire for folks to make sure that we're meeting these emission standards for all this equipment. And if we're taking a step in enforcing that in some way, if you had some kind of emissions inspection program that tried to seek out violators like this, as states have car inspection programs, there is no such program for off-road engines and equipment. The agency has never had one, and states do not have those. So this is the means that we have is the assurance with the manufacturer when they produce the engine that it meets the standards, that when they go out and meet all the EPA compliance parts as a manufacturer, that it continues to meet the standards. And otherwise, we're relying on good faith efforts of those that invest in these machines to maintain them and ensure that they do in fact fill the diesel exhaust fluid, that they don't take the particulate filter off and cut the tailpipe to remove the selective catalytic reduction system. It's all good faith. And those that choose to go the other way for their own benefit, that's harming everyone, not just giving them the benefit. So I don't know that in just my simple analysis of a legislation, I think the solution has been put on the table by manufacturers. What is the benefit of creating a process by which folks might have greater ability and encouragement through the access to some of these tools and new requirements to tamper?
Mr. Schaefer, thank you for your testimony and answering the questions this morning. I think we, at this point, should let you go back to your work, your other work, and invite Eric Wareham, if he's with us.
Yes,
good morning,
Chairman.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, Mr. If we want to hold questions till the end, I might have, as I get through my testimony, might answer a lot of them, and then we can be happy to circle back if that's okay.
That's fine.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Eric Wareham. I am Vice President of Government Affairs for the North American Equipment Dealers Association. We represent 4,500 farm, industrial, and outdoor power equipment dealers in North America. And I'm here to oppose House Bill 81, otherwise known as the Right to Repair Bill. There's a great irony in that, because our industry, I believe strongly, is a leading example of one that supports customer repair. You're going to hear from our dealers later on. I want to give them ample time to discuss their operations and how they support customer repair. But to set the stage for that, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of anecdotal evidence. I don't discount that. But when we talk about the reality of the repair landscape today, what does it look like? And I submitted to committee staff a infographic you should have received. It's kind of blue and orange. at the top, Repair Done Right, and there's several infographics on that. Do you have that, members of the committee, do you have that available to you?
We do, thank you.
I'd like to walk through that, just take a moment to set the stage here and talk about what's actually the repair landscape looks like today, because there's a lot of assertions made about whether there's a monopoly on repair for dealers, who can purchase what and when and what purpose. So I want to start with some background facts. The top line statistic there that you see, and these are national averages. This is a study conducted by a third party of our industry. And you'll hear from our dealers that in their instance, a lot of these data points are even higher and more favorable to their customers. But on national average, 56% of dealer parts are sold out the door and are not installed by the dealership. So that means that the majority of parts and repairs performed on farm equipment are done by someone other than the dealership. Now, I'm an attorney, but even in the plain meaning of the word of monopoly, having a majority of repairs done by someone other than the authorized dealership would not constitute a monopoly in any sense of the word. Also important is that who's performing those repairs and where are those parts sold. We asked our dealers about where they're selling to owners and independent repair shops. And what we found is that the average dealership sells to 9 independent repair shops. And 2 of them are actually in their top 10 parts customers on average. That's really important to understand for this bill. I'll circle back to this and the actual language in the bill in a bit. But it's important to understand that the independent repair shops, their business model is actually built on piggybacking on the dealership, sort of as a parts depot. The average dealership location stocks about $1 million in parts inventory. That's per location. So we're talking about a serious amount of investment in having things on hand ready to go for farmers and producers and even the independent repair shops. And that's why they have lower overhead, smaller facilities. They're able to, usually even have lower rates, but that's because they don't have the kind of infrastructure and investment in these types of things like inventory. So you may think that I'm saying at this point, or have the perception that there's no issue, there's nothing to see here. That's not true. Our dealers recognize more than anybody that there's an issue with downtime, and they have every incentive to increase uptime for their customers. It only makes sense financially that if their customers are doing well, they're doing well. But that doesn't mean that there's still not an issue with downtime for producers. But what's that attributable to? Is it attributable to the access and availability of parts, tools, documentation, and diagnostics? I would argue that it's not. You'd hear from our dealers that it's not. And we look to identify what are some of the issues that customers are facing. So in this infographic, you'll also see that the average dealership needs to hire 5 additional technicians. A lot of the anecdotes that you hear is about having to wait for the dealership to come to the farm. It's not the access and availability, again, of parts, tools, diagnostics, documentation. It's lack of capacity in the dealership. And we all understand this right now. It's a workforce development challenge, and we have a shortage. Our dealerships do a ton to hire technicians, recruit technicians. They actually pay for their education. We're really unique in that way. Our association has a foundation that we provide scholarships and support technical colleges around the country and in Canada to develop more technicians. And then what you also see is that we have technology that breaks down, but we also built in technology to fix it when it does. However, in this digital age, you need the digital infrastructure, meaning rural broadband, to be able to use things like remote diagnostic capabilities that basically take that limited amount of technicians and stretch them further. So we have, you can see 76% of our dealers responded that that expanded rural broadband would improve the dealership's use of remote diagnostic capability. to get people up and running quicker. Now, I will say this, and you'll hear it from our dealers, if you doubt the veracity of anything that I'm saying, we have held around 50 dealer demonstrations around North America. We've invited stakeholders, Farm Bureau, and legislators into the dealership to see what is available, ask questions. We're completely transparent about this. And I think that's actually what led to one of the first dealer demonstrations was in Kansas 6 years ago, I think at this point. And that's when Farm Bureau members started to say, aha, yeah, there's a lot of this available. We don't know this. We also need to be careful about how we approach this so that we don't have unintended consequences for our dealers and for ourselves as customers. And I'd like to get into that. So there's some serious legal hurdles with this bill, but it needs, there's a lot of talk. We talk in conceptually and abstract conversations sometimes about what the bill does and what it doesn't do. I'd like to point your attention to the actual bill itself, section 4052, and I'm looking at page 6 of 8, 7 of 8. The bill, for all this discussion about getting farmers up and running, solving this problem of downtime, the bill really does two things. First, it makes parts, tools, documentation, and diagnostics available on fair and reasonable terms. That's number one. Now, addressing that, I'd like to say, first off, that the MOU for automobiles and for between the manufacturers and Farm Bureau does not address parts. Parts in the sense of physical hardware that's used to fix tractors and combines and agricultural equipment. I know that you as legislators try to narrowly tailor your legislation to accomplish goals. And so I would ask you, what is the problem you're trying to fix? Because it seems like if we're talking about fixing the price of parts, that's conflating the issue of uptime and pricing of parts, because the price of parts doesn't make it more or less likely that they're going to be available. The availability and access to parts is really kind of irrelevant. And paradoxically, by fixing the price of parts or attempting to fix the price of parts, you're going to make it less likely that parts will be available and on hand. Anything you do to disincentivize the price of parts for our dealers is going to decrease the inventory they hold on hand and what they have available to sell to customers and independent repair shops. And how does that happen? Well, if you look at the bill parts 4AI, fair and reasonable, I don't know exactly what that means. I'm an attorney, but I can tell you that's not a discernible standard. And in a lot of ways, just saying you should sell something at a fair and reasonable price is, quite frankly, challengeable on being void for vagueness. Maybe you can, whoever the authors are, can explain a little bit of their intent behind that. But when we talk about pricing, fixing the price of parts, what you're doing, and it is in putting a cap on that or a ceiling on it, you're going to decrease the inventory that dealers hold on hand. The second thing that the bill does to actually address right to repair is in 4052 section B. And this goes to, it's hard to tell when I'm not in the room who was asking the question, but the representative that posed the question to Mr. Schaefer earlier about what the bill actually does to increase the likelihood of emissions tampering. And I want to point to that section B where it says, for equipment that contains an electronic security lock or other security related function. Now, what Mr. Schaefer was describing as far as emissions controls, those are controlled by electronic security locks. What this bill does is specifically, it says that it allows access and to reset the lock or function when disabled in the course of diagnosis, maintenance, or repair of the equipment. Now that's problematic for a couple of reasons. One is obviously the Clean Air Act, 40 CFR section 1068 101B is the section of code that establishes a prohibition on defeat devices for non-road equipment. And specifically, 42 USC 7543A says, quote, no state shall adopt or attempt to enforce any standard relating to the control of emissions. Now, the EPA recently had a large rulemaking published January 24th of this year for on-road and non-road vehicles. In the proposed final rulemaking for that, there was a section of guidance that I would refer you to, and I can supply this supporting documentation later. But they said, and this is somewhat of a lengthy quote, specific to right to repair, state right to repair laws, any state regulation requiring manufacturers to provide access to these controls would be directly in conflict with the Clean Air Act prohibition against tampering with certified engines and the prohibition against using defeat devices to circumvent emission standards. So it's the access in and of itself that the EPA says and has defined as a defeat device. That's our concern there. In addition to that, I would like to talk about the MOU and the difference between the MOU and legislation. There's a lot of discussion about that. Two things. One is in the MOU between manufacturers and the Farm Bureau, there is the opportunity for updates and revisions. And that's really important because this is a very complex issue, as you all are well aware of. You start to peel back the layers of the onions, there's a lot of layers to it. There needs to be this constant ability to revise these MOUs, because take the hypothetical that what if legislation was passed 20, 30 years ago? You don't even have to go back that far, maybe even 10 years ago, on the issue of right to repair. It wouldn't take into account all of the tremendous amount of technology that's been put in the field over the last 10 years and even 20 years. We're heading into an area where we're going to have autonomous tractors. This is not an area that's ripe for legislation, because it wouldn't even legislation adopted 20 years ago wouldn't even have been foreseen the technological advancements that we have now today, and it would be outdated. So you'd constantly be revisiting. This is certainly makes it more appealing to have a private sector solution with the major stakeholders. And if you're talking about, well, there's no enforceability, I don't work for John Deere. I work for the dealers, the independent dealers. But I would imagine that the Farm Bureau and John Deere and Case IH now have serious brand reputation at risk for breaching that. There's a huge market incentive for doing that, have that private sector solution stay in place. The second is the unintended consequences for dealers. When Farm Bureau looked at this, they said a lot of this legislation has to do with parts and pricing of parts. If we go down this road of trying to fix the price of parts, we're going to hurt the dealers. And by hurting the dealers, meaning they're going to reduce their inventories, we're just hurting ourselves. And so a lot of the Farm Bureau didn't agree with this exact type of legislation that attempts to fix the price of parts. That's why the MOU leaves that out. And they didn't want to have these unintended consequences of hurting the dealers. So I'll also mention that this bill does not do anything to standardize the diagnostics. That, again, would be, if a state were to attempt to do that, you'd have run into some serious challenges under the Dormant Commerce Clause. And as pointed out, the diagnostics are already available. There's even, if you do a quick Google search, not even from the manufacturers themselves, but from now there's third parties offering these diagnostic tools. So I'm not sure when we talk about, again, what this bill does and doesn't do, it seems to me this bill is not narrowly tailored to address the issue of uptime. It deals with the fixing of parts, the fixing of the price of parts, and then it deals with access to security locks and security-related functions that clearly is in derivation of federal EPA, Clean Air Act, and EPA guidance. With that, I'll stand for any questions.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you for clarifying the difference between the MOUs or at least one of the MOUs, and what's in the bill before us. Are you familiar with the legislation that in Colorado and West Virginia?
I was in Colorado testifying on that bill last week. So yes.
You're more familiar with it than we are, I suspect. Does the language in that bill include parks, if you happen to know that? Cover parks?
It does. And we've had lengthy conversations about the legal challenges and the scrutiny that it'll be subjected to if it passes, which it has not passed, by the way. There's amendments and it passed the Senate and it's heading back to the House for concurrence. But there were several amendments on that. I think there was a lot of concern about the effect they would have on the dealers in the state and the downstream effects that would have on customers and independent repair shops. So there were some attempts to change the language and amend it. But much like this bill, it's also interesting, and I think it's worth noting that in the language itself, on section 4052A, at the last paragraph states that not only does this affect the dealers who sell parts, it also is upsetting and turning on its head the traditional distribution model that has evolved over time in our industry for now 100 years, by saying that an original equipment manufacturer shall make the documentation, parts, and tools available either directly or through an authorized repair provider. Now, when I read that, that means that the OEM is going to have a legislative mandate by the state of Vermont to sell parts, tools, documentation, diagnostics directly to customers. That means setting up a point of sale for every single person who wants to buy parts to go directly to the manufacturer. That is a serious issue that would also drastically affect dealers who are circumvented by selling that through the traditional supply chain. The other issue is, of course, that what does the manufacturer have to sell that at? Now, you could say fair and reasonable is, manufacturer suggested retail like Colorado did, but then Colorado accidentally kind of left out and didn't address in their amendments the fact that the manufacturer still has to sell parts at cost, which this legislation also requires manufacturers selling parts, tools, documentation at cost. So even if you say, well, dealers, we're not going to restrict you to selling at your net cost because that would seriously affect you and your customers, you're still requiring the manufacturers to sell parts at cost. So So what happens in that scenario when people can order a part directly from the manufacturer at cost, or then go to the dealer who's going to have a marked up product?
Thank you for that response. And I see one more question here, Representative Rice.
I'm just trying to get at your understanding of that sentence, the last paragraph of 4052A. I'm reading the words either or, not both and. Either directly or through an authorized repair provider. So I'm just, can you just clarify for us why that would compel them to do both of those things, and as opposed to if they're selling them through an authorized repair provider, why are they then compelled also to make? So
your understanding of that, Mr. Chairman, Representative, your understanding of that statute is that it would not require OEMs to sell directly?
I'm just reading the sentence. If anybody else in the room has other understanding of that sentence, I would appreciate that.
Okay, not hearing anything there. I'm looking at the clock and not seeing any other hands raised. And I'm sorry, I did see a hand, maybe two. Representative O'Brien.
Eric, just one thing I wanted to understand, and you would know, with dealerships, do they generally buy the equipment from the OEMs, or do they sort of inventory it and then get a percentage when they sell, a combine?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative, it's the former. We don't consign equipment. Dealers purchase that equipment. They finance it, floor plan it, as we call it. But they are independent and they purchase that directly from the manufacturers, all their equipment and their parts.
Okay. My one other question was that, at least in Vermont, there are very few independent repair businesses for agricultural equipment. I would say, probably 90% repairs are done through dealers, and the rest, right, or at some point it's the farmers, or in a big farm situation, they probably have on-site mechanics, whether it's the farmer or somebody really who's dedicated to just keeping that whole fleet going. And so it seems in the case that you were mentioning of workforce issues, that right to repair would almost be a good thing, because a farmer desperate to meet a harvest window, it would give them one last chance to perhaps get a piece of equipment going. Because when they call up the dealership, and the dealership's like, well, we're down 2 mechanics and one's got COVID, and what are your options? It's either the farmer or nothing, right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative. So again, I think we're conflating this concept of right to repair with what this bill actually does. This bill fixes the price of parts, and it allows access to security locks and security related functions. Right now, with what is available without this legislation, with what is currently available on the market, widely available and accessible, 98% of repairs can be performed with what's available today. Now, that leaves 2%. And you may say, well, what about the other 2%? That other 2% that you cannot perform right now, that you don't have access to currently, is what the manufacturers are required to withhold by federal statute, meaning emissions criteria and safety criteria. So yes, there's 2% of repairs, and you'll hear from our dealers that even they don't have access to that a lot of times. They have to go back to the manufacturer, who has to have checks and balances, safeguards to ensure that it's not being done, or those certain diagnosis and repairs are not being done to circumvent emissions criteria or safety criteria. So I'm not sure what this legislation does. I mean, I get what you're saying and you're hypothetical, but this bill would do nothing to solve what you're talking about.
But you're saying, most farmers I know, if their tractor trips some sort of code and shuts it down, most of them I don't think know how to get to those diagnostic things, or they're unavailable. Right. So it seems, I don't know where that statistic's coming from, but you're saying like only 2% of things you can't fix. I'd say most of these breakdowns that farmers can fix are when a code is tripped, same with our cars too. And we don't know how to fix them. We have to go to a professional.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, again, I'll let our dealers talk to this because they deal with this every single day. I'm obviously an attorney for the association, but I've attended dozens of these dealer demonstrations. The access and the availability of these tools is already on the market. Now, again, if the farmer or the producer doesn't have the knowledge to use that, because it's very advanced in some cases, our technicians go through years of training and continued investment in their training to keep up with model and technology changes every year. This bill, again, does nothing to address whether the farmer has the knowledge to be able to use that. But it's certainly available, and it's been available before these MOUs even came out. Customer Advisor, I think, for construction equipment has been available for over a decade. So there's this kind of like, oh, well, the manufacturer's just responding to this now because of legislation. No, the legislation is misguided. And that's why as we start to, if you doubt what I'm saying again, we would be more than happy to have you to the dealership to demonstrate everything that is available. And I would say before you make a decision on this legislation, one way or the other, have a full grasp of the facts, because good policy makes good politics, not the other way around. And good policy is founded on having a full understanding of what the facts are. And you'll hear from our dealers in a little bit, and they'll give you the same invitation to come to their dealership and see what is available.
Thank you.
If we went to an independent, and just to be clear, you used the word independent earlier to, I think, make the distinction between the manufacturers and the dealers. So the dealers you represent are independent of the manufacturers, but we've been using independent, I think, to mean a repair shop that is not affiliated with a manufacturer. If we went to one of those independent shops, would we be able to see, I mean, I think the answer is no. We wouldn't be able to see those tools because they don't have access to them?
Incorrect. You'll hear from our dealers that they sell the customer service advisor tool. In the instance of Case IH, it's the electronic service tool. Both of those diagnostic tools have at or very, very near the same exact capacity to perform diagnostics as the dealer tools have. And they are priced at the same price that the dealers have. Now they're rather expensive, but that's the same price that the dealers pay. So yes, if you had an independent repair shop, and I personally have friends that have very large farms, and they've purchased that. They have the full suite of tools, whether you want to spend the money to do that or you want to rely on your dealership. But again, this bill would do nothing to change that.
Thank you very much. And you're welcome to stay, of course, and listen. But I think we'll bring Michael McKenna up next. Oh, I'm sorry. I missed one more question, if you wouldn't mind. Representative Cole.
Sure. So so a lot of this discussion has been tailored toward the parts segment of the legislation. And I'm not convinced that it will affect supply, because the legislation is very explicit. You keep using this term fixed price, but that's not what the legislation is asking for. It's in fact guaranteed that the price of parts could not be adjusted to below the market or the price of bringing these parts to market. So it's more considering, that might fluctuate, that number. So that means fixed is not really a word we can use to associate, with the changes here. But I think the goal is to make them, reasonable at the will of, trying to protect farmers who are in need of these parts. So in terms of supply, I think the only way that could be impacted is really if somehow the cost was lower than bringing these products to market, but that is not, in fact, legally, it could not be the case with the wording of this bill.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I'm not sure where you're reading that, but I will quote directly from the bill itself. So costs, we're looking at section 4AI, costs are fair to both parties considering the agreed upon conditions, promise, quality, and timeliness. And then you have terms in addition to that that don't really relate to the cost. Now, if you go skip further down to BI for tools and documentation. So again, pause there. Go back to what is fair and reasonable? What is the purpose in even putting that in? And quite frankly, have you heard from anyone testifying at all, ever, that they could not get a part? Maybe that's a hypothetical, but I've never heard that. I've testified in over 100 hearings on this bill, and I've never heard anyone claim that they could not buy a part. So I'm not sure why the parts language is involved in this, but I will continue on. Why is it fair and reasonable? So what is fair and reasonable? Again, not an ascertainable standard. We don't know what that means. I think it's going to be void for vagueness. But when you go to tools and documentation in BI 2 terms, it says that costs are equivalent to the lowest actual costs for which the original equipment manufacturer offers the tool, software, documentation to an authorized repair provider. That means that they must sell it at dealer net cost. Now, that's for tools and documentation. However, under terms, for some reason, even though parts separately defined, in 2I, it says that terms are equivalent to the most favorable terms under which an original equipment manufacturer offers the part, tool, software, or documentation. The terms and conditions include the price at which an OEM offers the part to an authorized dealer. This statute clearly says that an OEM must sell directly to or through an authorized dealer at cost.
Okay, thank you. And we'll welcome, thank you for your testimony. We'll welcome Michael McKenna. I think it's
I really truly don't know how I'm going to top Eric. That was pretty impressive, I think. But good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Michael McKenna. I'm Vice President with United Ag and Turf and United Construction and Forestry. On behalf of United, I'm here to express our opposition to House Bill 81. For some background, we're an independently owned and operated John Deere dealership. We have 56 locations in the Northeast. 9 of those locations are in Vermont. We employ over 900 employees. Approximately 125 of those employees are employed in Vermont. We've certainly heard some great testimony, or I think so, on the emissions and the safety and tampering, and Eric certainly teed up a lot of my testimony very well. My big emphasis always is customers do have the right to repair their equipment, and we as a dealer fully support our customers' right to repair. And this is everybody. This is not, just some farmers or just some in the repair shops. This is every single customer. As a John Deere dealer, we have had parts manuals, parts lookup functions, repair manuals, diagnostic tools, and special tools available for our customers who choose to repair their own equipment. And not just recently, not just with the MOU, but for a very, very long time. Our customer diagnostic offering is called Customer Service Advisor. This can be purchased directly from Deere or through any John Deere dealership. It doesn't even have to be the dealership you bought your equipment from. This particular offering allows customers to connect to machines for diagnostic troubleshooting purposes. It gives them access to operators manuals, which ultimately do come with the machines, test manuals, repair manuals, parts manuals. We have parts lookup available online to everyone in the world, quite frankly, and again, has been for some time. The repair and technical manuals are available to be purchased separately, not even part of the Customer Service Advisor package. And again, that's been forever and ever, and they can purchase that directly from Deere or through the dealers. Interestingly enough, I believe you heard testimony earlier on a fuel injection issue on a machine in Wisconsin. The Customer Service Advisor software could have been used by that customer to help diagnose that particular issue if they had chosen to make the investment in that particular software. I can't speak to issues that the dealer may have had by getting it done in a timely fashion, but that software would have helped it. It's part of that It's not part of the 2% Eric spoke of. It would have been part of that 98% of everything else that can be repaired. Our full special tool catalog is available for purchase through our parts departments. And in many instances, we partner directly with our customers to ensure they have access to the special tools that they need. Like we actually loan them out to them. Here you go, use it, bring it back, on Friday. Again, as previously stated, we fully support our customers and independent repair shops' right to repair and do business. With increased demands from consumers on fuel efficiency, evolving technology, and the increased regulations for safety and emissions, this has become an increasingly expensive endeavor. It's not just, a metal toolbox with a couple of wrenches and a screwdriver anymore. Our repair shops and our repair process do not look today like it did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And this is ultimately not different than any other industry, with the automotive industry, really obviously standing out in that aspect. What we predominantly find is that there's a massive education that is needed to provide consumers and independent repair shops with the knowledge of all the offerings that exist today. That being said, in many cases, when that education is provided, it's incredibly costly. And I think that's more what we run into, is understanding that as a smaller independent repair shop, and as Eric mentioned, lower overhead, using our warehouse or, our facilities as warehouses, they're not looking to make the large investment as many smaller farms or individuals aren't looking to make the investment in the diagnostic tools. So as a dealer, we stock approximately $50 million in parts, which is pretty close to that $1 million average Eric spoke about. We do this to provide parts, same-day parts availability to meet our customers' needs, and ultimately provide quality partnerships with those customers so they can meet their own uptime requirements. Meeting that same-day commitment requires stocking costly parts and rare parts, but it removes the liability from our customers who, to stock and maintain their own inventory. And Eric said 55% go to customers. We're very happy to say that over 65% of our parts go over the counter for self-repair, which is an awesome number. The H-81 bill, as introduced, does specifically speak to the fair and reasonable terms and cost, fair and reasonable to both parties with respect to part, tool, software, and documentation. My biggest question is always going to be, what is fair and reasonable, and who determines that? There's no statute or regulatory anything for that. We are already being fair and reasonable with our customers. We regularly work with our customers so that they can shoulder the cost of their repair in a fair and equitable manner. We offer specials, coupons, early order opportunities, special financing terms. We do tons of stuff to make sure that they're being treated properly. Imposing pricing guidelines or allowing consumers to purchase direct from an OEM. And I was reading the line, either directly or through, and certainly I think that there's a lot of ambiguity in that statement, and it is available to interpretation, because when I'm reading it, I'm thinking in my head, yeah, it could mean one or the other, but it doesn't say one or the other. It says either directly or through. Like, I can either directly buy something from Amazon, or I can go to the store down the road and buy it, right? It's a choice, meaning you'd have to have it available in both scenarios. That's how I read it and interpreted it. Imposing the pricing guidelines, again, if that happens and we're not able to make the profit that we make on parts, which goes to helping run our businesses and cover overhead, I don't need to get into that, but consumer costs would actually increase and availability would potentially be pushed further out on parts, right? Because shipping costs, freight delays, supply chain issues, what we deal with every single day as dealers that we try to stay ahead of to provide the best that we can for our customers, this would be far more prevalent in a direct-to-consumer space if the dealer was taken out of the mix. And ultimately, as such, if an end user is able to purchase directly from an OEM, there's also no benefit to an independent repair provider anymore. If a dealer is not able to make a fair and reasonable profit on the parts and services we sell in the state of Vermont, then the incentive of doing business in Vermont becomes obsolete. Tax revenues in the state will decrease as our sales decrease. Employee wages coming to the state decrease as less employees are needed to fulfill decreased customer demand. New dealers coming to the state will certainly think twice, and our expansion and growth within the state would decrease, potentially even go away. We've heard multiple times about the MOU. Our commitment to farmers was recently formalized in that, but we have been doing this and we've been committed to our farmers for years before anything like that was brought up. Again, it's an education issue. In addition, this year, John Deere is actually rolling out enhanced customer solution that includes a mobile device interface and the ability to download secure software updates directly to the embedded controllers on the John Deere equipment, specifically with 4G connections. That's that 2% Eric talked about. And of course, the bigger issue is there's a lot of rural and remote areas that don't have a solid 4G connection, and that certainly can hold us back in some cases. I think it's, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, and I think, everyone in this industry will say this, is John Deere and United, of course, we're continuously innovating, developing, and bringing to market new technologies and solutions that enable our customers to be more productive, efficient, and sustainable. In conclusion, I don't think H81 needs to go any further than where it is today. This is not a bill that we need. We are already doing this.
All right, thank you, Mr. McKenna. Committee members, questions, Representative Supernaut.
Thank you for that. And Michael, this could be for you or back to Eric as well. But we keep hearing that fair and reasonable terms is so vague. And in your opinions, it would be void because of vagueness. But as we're referring back to the MOU, the language is identical, saying that equally assure the timely availability on fair and reasonable terms. So you're asking us to do away potentially with a piece of legislation that would be binding and refer only to an agreement with the same language. Am I right?
You know, I just am looking for definition on fair and reasonable. What is fair and reasonable?
I think we would like to know in the MOU as well.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with that, but but the big thing with fair and reasonable is that it's incredibly subjective, right? If I say I want a cheeseburger, is fair and reasonable $5, or do I want the fancy Wagyu burger on the brioche roll with the hand cut fries from the pub down the street that it's $30? It depends on the perspective.
Exactly, right? And I think depending on the perspective in the MOU is very concerning, because that you are leaving up to the private sector to determine what that perspective is.
I'm not worried about the MOU, but I'm worried about this in the state of Vermont that specifically has this vague, and it's specifically talking to parts, and it specifically refers to selling parts directly to consumers at cost.
So does the MOU. It is the same.
The MOU does not talk about selling directly to consumers from an OEM at cost.
I would say that the vagueness exists and that the concern would be the same. And how I would read it, I would be concerned.
Right. So are we putting something that's that concerning into actual law? That would be immensely concerning.
I think what's more concerning is that you are wanting to rely on a document that is just as vague and leaving it up to individuals who have the corporate control versus legislation that doesn't.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pretty sure what I said was I appreciated the MOU, but we have already been doing this for our customers, and we are already being fair and reasonable with them.
What does fair and reasonable mean then in your understanding?
Fair and reasonable, in my understanding, is ultimately allowing us to sell the parts for the prices we need to in order to put ourselves on the line to stock what we stock to provide the services we provide for our customers.
And perhaps we could provide the same clarity in this piece of legislation to equally say something similar.
Possibly.
Representative O'Brien.
Michael, just to give us some context, I don't know if you can see the screen behind you, but I just wondered, how ballpark, how much does the tractor behind you cost? And
$900,000.
Okay, and ballpark, I trigger a code there. I'm the farmer. I want to buy the customer service provider kit, right?
Sure.
How much does that cost me as a farmer?
$3,000.
And that should provide me with enough, at least to get started, right, to fix it.
For this tractor and all the other 10 tractors in the fleet, we would love to sell you very shortly.
Representative Rice.
Michael, does that diagnostic kit that's available give the farmer the ability to reset the code? So they've triggered the code, they understand the problem, they make the physical repair. Can they then wipe the code now that they've fixed the problem using that diagnostic tool?
With that tool for the consumer, they can reset the code. They can't wipe the code. There will continue to be a record of it.
But it won't. But they can remove the code so it does not hamper the performance of the equipment.
Ultimately, as long as the issue has been repaired, yes.
Okay.
I mean, you can't just keep resetting it if you haven't taken the steps to repair it.
Well, I'm asking the question because we heard testimony from a Vermonter earlier this morning who had purchased non-Deere equipment from a Deere dealer and had the piece of equipment was throwing a code. The the person repairing it understood what the problem was, fixed the hardware issue, and was still unable to operate the machinery because of the code that was being thrown. So I'm trying to understand if this tool that you say is available and could have been purchased for $3,000 would have.
This tool is for the John Deere equipment. So unfortunately, I cannot speak to that particular issue.
But these tools are widely available across the market. Is this something that only John Deere is doing, or would you say that these are the same kinds of things are being done across the industry?
This is definitely not only John Deere. This is definitely across the industry, and I can absolutely speak for our biggest competitors, if you will. With Kubota, with Case New Holland, the big manufacturers stepping up and providing this. This is not iPhones for us. This is not a new one every year. We have customers and equipment in the fields that are out there for 40, 50 years in some cases, right? We want customers to continue to have this equipment, to feel safe with the equipment, for it to work as designed for a very, very, very long time. And we realize that there are supply chain issues and employee shortages. It does us no good to hold our customers back from getting what they need and taking care of their equipment and getting up in the field and being productive. This $900,000 machine that's not running, that's not working in the middle of harvest, it's amazing that it's a great machine, but it's costing those farmers thousands and thousands of dollars in their downtime, right? They'll never buy another machine from us again or step foot into our dealership if we don't provide a solution that works. It is to our benefit to maximize their uptime and to have everything available. We're very hard to do that, but we can't do it if we also can't make fair and reasonable profit, and if we're circumvented within the parts and other processes directly.
Just ask a quick. Michael, one more quick question. Does the customer service provider kit, is it also available to, say, municipal fleets and forestry industry?
It's available to absolutely anybody that would like to buy it, period. Right. So and we have a ton of customers with tons of subscriptions that use this regularly, that have their own technicians, that maintain their own fleets, that buy the parts from us, that never come into the dealership, and they're very successful with it.
So if I have our town owns a John Deere grader, or if I'm a logger and I have a John Deere skidder, same thing.
Yep. Yeah, your forestry equipment, your skidder, your logger, and within the next year or two, even your lawn tractor, right? You want to spend $3,000 on the diagnostic tool for your $3,000 lawn tractor? We will happily take care of you on that.
Thank you.
I'm going to say thank you, Mr. McKenna, and invite Chris Gibson to join us.
Thank you.
Good morning. I would like to thank everybody for giving me a moment to speak here. I may take a little different approach than everybody else has because I'm a several generation Vermonter, unlike some people have been here speaking, like Mr. Tisbert, I believe, is a Vermonter, and this is a very passionate industry for me because my grandfather being a dairy farmer, my father being a logger. I've been around this my whole life. I've spent the last 26 years in the dealer industry, and I think the bill as presented is not in the best interest of what we're trying to do here for Vermonters themselves. We have 125 employees at Champlain Valley Equipment with a salary without benefits of $7.3 million, plus all the suppliers we use. These are local things. We supply parts, we supply service. We have 14 service trucks at $145,000 a piece to try to give the best service we possibly can. We're passionate about this industry. We all try to do our very best every day. And if we're going to limit our parts pricing and not be able to make any money, how can I support these people? How can I support the businesses that support us? How can I afford to put parts on the shelf for the farmer that needs them? The independent repair shop is not feasible without my parts supply. Well, so where is that going to come from? I would invite any of you folks, I think, before we go forward on any legislation, to come to one of our dealerships so I can help educate you what we do every day, what the farmer sees, what the consumer sees, the whole spectrum. I'd be more than happy to do that with any or all of you all at once. And I really hope that you folks would take the time to do that. I mean, we've talked about emissions, we've talked about several other things. I'd like to just hit on the safety aspect of this a little bit. I've been in this business, like I said, a long time, and we've had machines come in from independent repair shops that they couldn't fix. They brought them to us. We're happy to do the work. And they had bypassed the safety systems on older machines that didn't require the diagnostic tool to do so. And I had an employee run over and will be maimed for the rest of his life. So I'm a little passionate about that. I'm sorry if I feel that way or appear that way, but when a man's life is altered because something like that happens, I find that very important. We also always try to do our very best to try to serve people in the best way possible. 73% of our parts go out the door to farmers themselves, independent repair shops. So we're only 27% of our business is being repaired in our shop. So I think that a lot of the what's being done is currently happening. Kubota, Case IH, which I currently work with, I'll provide the diagnostic tool just like John Deere does, so that people can do, like I say, 98% of that. The only things that they don't allow are emission standards and safety systems. I don't want to hold everybody up here too long because I'm sure everybody wants to go to lunch and everybody loves lunch. So I would like to bring forward and see if you have any questions.
All right, thank you. Questions from the committee? Representative O'Brien.
Chris, I don't know if you're listening to Michael's testimony from United Ag, but once again, how much does that sort of service provider kit cost for Champlain Valley to sell to a farmer?
But depending on the manufacturers, between $3,000 and $3,500.
So pretty similar.
Very similar. We have to be competitive in the marketplace because the market sets the standard. If that's the problem I have with your parts programs, because the market's not setting the standard. How could you legislate a business who's trying to provide? We don't. Every owner in our dealership is from Vermont. Every employee is from Vermont. We keep our money here locally. It's not going out anywhere else. So we're trying to help our farmers. We try to employ people in Vermont. We try to do the best for our communities because we care about our communities. This is very important to us.
So just ballpark, do you have any idea of how many of those provider kits you sell a year in Vermont to farmers?
Last year we sold 3. And also, Ms. Supino earlier, I said about the emission standards, it was written in the bill that they would be illegal. I'd like to ask what the oversight for those emission standards would be, since on-road vehicles have inspection and those people have a standard every year. Is there going to be a section of Vermont government to make sure that those emission standards are being held to?
Thank you for your question.
It doesn't work that way, but no, there's nothing in the bill that addresses that.
So are we getting the cart ahead of the horse a little bit? If we don't know how we're going to enforce things, then how would we make a law that we don't know how we're going to enforce?
Any other questions? Senator Rice? No? Okay. Well, you encouraged us to start thinking about lunch. Maybe that's why. But thank you for joining us, and thank you for waiting patiently throughout the entire couple of hours that preceded your testimony.
Everybody else kind of went through a lot of the stuff I was going to talk about. So I wanted to talk about the personal level and how this affects the state of Vermont and the people in it. And I just think we need to take a reflect on how that's going to happen. And I would like to invite you folks to our dealership so we can go through what we do every day and show you what we do and how we are impassioned about helping the farmers in the community we serve.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who was able to join us this morning. All right, so we'll end this section of our day. We will have Representative Levitt back, I think, after lunch. Right now, I'm sorry, it will be after the floor. And right now, that's a TBD. We're not sure how long the floor is going to be or exactly what we're going to be covering.
Are we still on air?
We are, yeah. We're all done here, yeah.